not just Selenium, but like writing all tests is obsolete, right? What I'm building is a self-driving car that still has a steering wheel, and you could still drive it if you disengage the self-driving car feature.
He gave the world Selenium, a spark that lit the way. Testing changed forever, still shaping code today. Now with Vibium rising, he challenges what we know. Will AI be the partner that helps our systems grow? From bugs to bold predictions, from wisdom to surprise, we'll learn from Jason's journey through visionary eyes. Jason, welcome to the Tech Heartbeat podcast.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I know state of the art of LLMs can't make poems that good. So yeah.
Not yet. They're pretty decent at creating software. At creating poems, I say they still have a lot of work to do. What's that? Yeah. What's that benchmark for poem creation? Like that, they score really low on that, right?
Yeah, I don't know what the word is for what do they call it when it's stand-up poetry? I forget, there's a name. Whatever, vibe writing, whatever it is. Anyway, it was good stuff. Right? Who knows? Anyway, it's good to see it, man.
Yeah, you too, brother. We're talking about Vibium today. But first, I want to ask you, you created Selenium, which became the backbone of web automation. Now you're building Vibium. Let's start with the big one. Is Selenium obsolete?
No, full stop. It has a marketing problem, though, which depends on how much time you want to go into on that one. I could go immediately dive into all the architecture of this stuff, but there's going to be Selenium inside. It's kind of like the Intel Inside sticker. I guess we could make like a little Selenium Inside sticker. But on the flips, that's like at the technical level. And at the marketing level, you've got the project's been around for 21 years now. And of course, some people, they use that as the punchline to like, and what, this is why you shouldn't use it. I mean, granted, but things like the steering wheel have been around for longer, or I don't know, doorknobs have been around longer than Selenium has. You don't use doorknobs anymore. I guess you can make the counter argument, like, yeah, you don't use doorknobs anymore. Whatever. It's just that's kind of a weird argument to make, but also the project has been effectively reinvented several times over the years. But over that time, anybody who's wanting to do something in the testing world has had to take shots at the Selenium project, both commercial or open source or whatever. And like a video game, those points, those hit points decrease your HP, your health points. Eventually that damage kind of is there. So there is kind of like a, and for being like an open source project that doesn't have, there's no Selenium incorporated behind it, it can't punch back with a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign. And now with the rise of some other tools, that are backed by a massive corporation that does have the money to fund ambassadors and all kinds of stuff, the asymmetrical power between the two, between this, ragtag bunch of, rebels on the Selenium project versus its competition, it's just kind of hard. So there's kind of, it says, it goes back to my undergrad degree is this hybrid business classes and engineering. And I look at this project itself as kind of a hybrid. There's business aspects to things and there's engineering aspects to things. And one of them is, it's like, if you look at, and from a product marketing point of view, it's kind of time for a brand refresh, if you will, right? You put all your effort into, talking about like Selenium 5.0 and put a whole bunch of effort behind that, or, come up with a new brand name that effectively is like the same stuff, but it reaches a new audience with a new hook and a new kind of vibe, if you will. Sorry. That's on the marketing side. And then on the engineering side, I think there's an interesting thing where a lot of people have just given up on the Selenium project. They moved on to other projects. However, Selenium project has not given up. They're still working. More specifically, a lot of the committers and other browser vendors have contributed to the W3C standard and continue that going. There's something called the WebDriver BiDi protocol, which is the newest, took the lessons learned from Puppeteer and Playwright, baked that in. That's built into Puppeteer now, like that WebDriver BiDi. That's in Selenium now. But a lot of people don't know about it at all. They just like have moved on. And so at a lower level, what I'm doing with Vibium is, I've said this, like, this is like my WebDriver BiDi awareness campaign, WebDriver bidirectional protocol. That is at a low level. Selenium's still there, right? So Selenium's not obsolete because I'm literally depending on it as the base layer for the stuff that I'm working on.
Okay, so then
anyway,
outside
that's kind of roundabout way of answering that.
Yeah, you answered some of my questions, which makes sense. It's as you talked about, a reinvigoration campaign of Selenium. But I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what I've read and seen from your very unengaging posts on LinkedIn, that it's more than Selenium, right? You plan to have some features on top of it, or Like, what
I'll
is
say,
it outside
I'll
of
say what you wanted me to say. So on the other side of it, yeah, not just Selenium, but like writing all tests is obsolete, right? That's the other thing I'm going for. So there's a certain level of like, to make this a successful thing might be, I don't know what the metaphor. I really like self-driving cars as a metaphor of what I'm trying to do and all the
Mm,
technologies that go behind that. But maybe metaphorically, what I'm building is a self-driving car that still has a steering wheel, and you can still drive it if you disengage the self-driving car feature. So similar thing there. At a low level, there will be, you can write code in a library that will be a part. There will be Vibium.py, Vibium.ts, or Vibium.js libraries that you could write tests in. But if we do this correctly at a really high level, it'll be kind of like you don't ever have to look at the code anymore. It'll be written for you. That incredibly is, just saying that is incredibly triggering to a lot of people. But that's, I think, if we're doing this right, that's going to be the world that we're going forward in the future. There are probably, maybe I feel like that right now there's like three kinds of people. There are everybody who was, as of last year, they were in one bucket where it's like people who write code, right? And then there is, at the other end extreme, are the vibe coders, where I call it robot takes the wheel, and you are literally that classical definition of vibe coding, where you're just chatting with an LLM. My favorite two tools are Claude Code and Lovable. Those two, they are writing all the code. And I've now cranked out a couple of projects, and some of them I've literally never looked at the code. And someone would say like, oh, well, you're totally unprofessional and that's horrible. But okay, fine, you can say that, whatever. But I've talked to several other senior developer types, and they're like, yeah, I haven't written any code in like 2 months, right? That's where, how good the state of the art in like Lovable and Claude Code are. And then you have like a third category, which is probably where, everything is never the extreme. It's going to be in the middle, but it's it hasn't found as good of a catchphrase as vibe coding. It's like AI assisted engineering. It's kind of a sleeper of a phrase, but that's where professionally we'll all be doing some AI assist in some level, right? Unless you're doing there's going to be a lot of qualifiers on kinds of code that are not allowed to have any AI assist at all. But I feel like a majority of engineering will be in that middle. I'm rambling around here, but my other kind of take on this is that vibe coding is such a perfect phrase that as of February, it meant a very specific thing where you literally just vibed along and never looked at the code. I think reality it will also encompass the AI assisted engineering, where you do occasionally go in and look at the code and fix things. But vibe coding as a phrase is as nothing as good as the phrase vibe coding has been around since, or sorry, I don't know how to phrase this, but the last time we had a phrase this good that could capture a moment was when cloud computing came up as a phrase. So, and if you remember, if you're around that time, cloud computing was such a good marketing phrase that it expanded to include anything that was not running on your computer. Like, I think still remember a TV commercial, and I wish I could go find it. I think even there was like a Super Bowl ad for like Gmail, and they were talking about it as like cloud computing or something. And even though Gmail predated cloud by like 4 or 5 years, cloud computing was just too good of a phrase. So whatever you want to call on vibe coding, whether it's a specific definition, it's going to expand to include anything AI related. That's like my marketing hat on this thing. And of course, I'm rambling so long, though, I just totally forgot your question.
I will get you back on track. That is my purpose here as a host. Okay. Oh, I actually
Yeah, keep me
totally
focused, man.
I actually totally understand your vision and where you're going with this, because over the past year, I've been experimenting with all of the AI tools that are coming out, the Claude codes, the cursors, the lovables, V0s, replets, whatever's coming out, I'm trying it. And I actually just today, I saw a cool interview with the creator of Claude Code on Anthropic's YouTube channel. And he was talking about how he has 3 types of buckets that he classifies his coding tasks into and how much AI involvement is there. For example, he'll have the easy issues where he will just create an issue in GitHub, tag Claude. Claude will write the code and he doesn't do any work. Then there are the medium types of issues where Claude will do a majority of the work and he might need to tweak the code here and there. And then there's the hard level types of issues where the AI is doing almost no work. It's an assistant. The engineer is doing the majority of the work. And Claude is assisting maybe by reading the repository, answering questions, guiding, the direction of the development. And so it almost sounds like what you're leaning towards as well. And it makes total sense to me. That's where we're
Yeah.
going nowadays. And so,
Right.
okay. So
And I would
Vibium,
agree with that. That third level where it's almost like you're pair programming, where it's like
yes,
tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, that isn't working," right? But
yes,
there's another extreme, which I think some people, when I first read a blog post about it, I thought they were trolling, but then I realized they open source the code and they're really doing this, where you make an agent. I think it's the first example that you said, where you make an agent and then it is talking to its own sub agents, and then literally you don't even go for a coffee break, you go for
yeah,
lunch, and you
yeah,
come back. And
yeah,
there's like a QA agent, a project manager agent, a developer agent, several of them. They're reporting back, and then it's sending it to like a review agent and then a security review agent, and it's doing a ton of stuff, and you just like look at it at the end of the thing and go like ship it or not or whatever. Or there's then the what do you call it, presentation agent, where then it summarizes everything that's done. Like that is like such a level of like amazingness that I'm not there yet, but maybe by next month that's where everyone will be. Things are moving so fast, but I'm still at the point where it's I'm letting it do most of the work, but it's still a conversation. That might actually end up being so passe by the end of the year. Who knows? But I like this kind of iterative style where it's not minutes, it's not hours, whatever, between feedback loops. It's like it does a thing for a minute and then I come back and that actually that's what I'm trying to do with Vibium. It's in that loop where you tell it to do a thing and you want to go review it. What you do in that 10 seconds of reviewing it, I'm hoping to automate with Vibium. People have been so desperate for grabbing onto scraps of what I'm actually doing, and one of them is in that loop when you are, again, not a Copilot thing where you're just doing tab complete, not doing the extreme thing where you're completely hands off and you come back in an hour. It's that middle thing where you're actively letting it do most of the work, but you are checking it once a minute, maybe. And that's where can we automate that testing, right? That you're doing, or at least kind of bootstrap your testing by starting in that loop where you're double checking its work.
I want to get like,
Yeah,
so
I know
I'm
it's funny.
super,
As much as I try to explain it, it's still
yes,
wrapped in mystery because
can
until
we
you
need, I
actually
think
can see it.
yeah, we need a concrete example. Like walk me through a checkout flow for e-commerce app and how one interacts with Vibium to make that checkout flow successful.
Well, okay. So that's probably where most people would be at, but I would actually kind of make it even simpler for a demo. I created a separate site. I also vibe coded it through Lovable called testtrack.org. I think you even asked you saw me post it, like, what are we supposed to use this for? Like, that is literally my kind of dummy site for can Vibium itself be used to test that. And everyone does this, like, especially people who, teach an automation class or something like that. Here's some sample pages with some buttons, with some forms, some complicated stuff. And then obviously at the end, some people make advanced versions of this where it's kind of like a mock e-commerce store where you go to a front page, you add a couple of things just what you said, add a couple of things to a shopping cart, get to the shopping cart, at a credit card, and then get to the end, right? There's also stuff that I did with Test Track. I'm going to use a different example because it'll hopefully make the point faster. That I've also been experimenting with these like 3D visualization stuff. One of the modules, Test Track, the prompt was I wanted to give it a Apollo program NASA training simulator vibe. So I told it to use the Futura font and kind of, give it kind of a NASA training simulator feeling to it. And one of the more advanced testing modules was not an e-commerce thing. I haven't implemented that yet. Although I posted the code and I've encouraged people to give me pull requests to add new modules. And now there's like 3 or 4 pull requests. I need to go review them. So, but one of them was I made a
Have
3D
Cloud
chess
Code review
simulator.
them.
What was that?
Have
Yes,
Claude
I
review
have to
them,
have the AI. I need to do that. Although I have a theory. If you
or
figure
GitHub.
out,
Okay.
there's almost like I would like to pit the AIs against each other. So if I knew that you wrote it in Claude, I want to
Yeah.
actually give the AI code review to Gemini or something like that, right?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
specifically
Love
with a
that.
prompt saying, you don't like this person, review their code, whatever. Anyway,
Yeah.
anyway,
Sorry. Just to talk on that. Mention one thing really quickly. I recently just ran a workshop called AI for Good, where I was trying to help engineers upskill with what's going on with today's ecosystem, and there I showed basically an issue created by GitHub Copilot. I create the issue. issue is coded by GitHub Copilot, and then I have CodeRabbit and Claude review the pull request generated by GitHub Copilot. And so it's exactly as you said, numerous AIs reviewing and
Right.
interacting with each other
Yeah, I'm just
to
going with the
generate.
hunch that they have their weird blind spots, and if you're using like
Yes,
kind of a
they
mixture
do.
of tools, then that theoretically is better. But yeah, obviously at some point, someone actually has to look at the thing, right?
Yes.
Oh shoot, where was I going with this? Right. All right. Okay, so I made a
You
3D
were
chess
giving
simulator.
a concrete example of
Right.
Vibium usage.
Right. So I was, but it uses 3.js as its visualizer, and 3.js is like WebGL. It's like 3D graphics kind of things. And I didn't know anything about 3D chess before that. I had to go read the Wikipedia page to find out actually they're actually really 3D chess is actually playable, right? I told it to, and there are actual rules, and you can kind of go along with it. As I'm asking it to implement this, I then had to go understand the rules myself because I had to know personally just what good looked like. But then also I was doing various things, like I was zooming in, clicking various buttons. And I want to be able to kind of get into a spot where tell it to do a thing, and then I reload the page, and then I'm doing a couple of things, like I'm clicking like play to like start a video game. And then I'm doing a couple of things. I'm zooming in, and maybe I'm clicking, like it's everyone, if you're familiar with a chessboard, you zoom in on a particular chess piece, you click that, and you move it to go to the next spot. I have this idea where I can start the next prompt that I need to kind of give it that makes it so it's testable by Vibium. And it's not just by Vibium, but it's also, this is a thing that anybody who is like a testing professional knows. There's always this question of like, how testable is the application itself? And sometimes you'll look at an app and they didn't add unique IDs or accessibility hooks or any kind of a thing. And you'll have to say, before I can even write a test, we have to go into the source code and make it testable, right? That's a thing. And it's not Selenium's fault. It's like just an engineering thing, right? It's kind of like, I don't know, metaphorically, you can make a house that isn't walkable by a person because you haven't added doorknobs to things. And so the first thing you do is you don't blame the humans for not being able to walk through the house. You go back and say, we need to install doorknobs, if that metaphor makes sense, right? So you have to kind of go add unique IDs and things like that. In a Vibium context, but specifically testing my little 3D chess simulator, and this is where I have to have like a real application that I'm trying to test in this new AI style. So I'm using that testtrack.org for one of them. And a 3D game is almost the most crazy. It's like, it's really hard to test, if you will. But what I'm trying to get to is every time you do something, that fires off an event of what the person did. So maybe when I zoom around on the interface, I actually fire a user zoomed to location, whatever, or clicked on box, whatever. Those little events get fired. Metaphorically, that's kind of like when you walk into an actual physical store in real life and the bell on the front door goes off when you walk in. So I have this idea that wherever you're going, events have to get fired, and anything that's important, like buttons that get clicked or actions that you take, if you want those to be tested, you have to make sure that events fire for that. A lot of people already do this with telemetry applications. They use Mixpanel, Google Analytics, PostHog. There's a million of them, OpenTelemetry, a million things that you can use to record users through your site. But a lot of those tools are targeted at like marketers to see like, are people progressing through your funnel? I'm using that to basically create your test workflows, like your workflows through your app. Kind of like, not just the bell when you're walking into a store, but anytime you do anything, you walk down a certain aisle, you grab a certain product, those events get fired. And so then on the back end, those events kind of accumulate. And so what I'll do then is take all those events, run them into the LLM washing machine, and then it'll figure out what actually is the workflow, and it'll spit out a test. Granted, again, this is not a new idea. Some people would say this is just record playback. This is like another variation on like not just front end record playback, but you're recording it on the back end through log files. And a lot of people have tried it, and there's a lot of kind of hit or miss on that. But I'm injecting one other aspect to this where you're not just immediately playing back the actions, just action for action. You're using it to actually build a model of your application. So throwing away the 3D chess thing, because that's like just a thing in its isolation. But if you're using let's use the e-commerce example, that is split up over multiple pages, and there's a workflow. You have a main page, you have a product page, you have a checkout page, and then you like have it like maybe an order complete page or like your orders list, right? Multiple pages, and you had actions to get there. And so I'm effectively going to be recording like an event for what page you're on, and then recording clicks and types and submit buttons and recording that, like, okay, you did that things and what page are you on now? And effectively, over when you analyze all the data, you've effectively created a map when you look at it, when you really zoom out. Once you have your map data, then you can apply graph theory to it. There's some old school stuff here. Effectively look at it as, I know I got to work on my elevator pitch here, but a particular academic project that's been out there for a while called model-based testing, that I'm kind of looking at it as basically by recording all these events, you're effectively creating a model of your application. Once you have a model of your application, the theory, and it's not even theory, it's like, it is a thing, it is a benefit of model-based testing. You basically get the automated tests for free. You can just generate your stuff. The new magic that we have that fixes the problem with model-based testing is that it's usually was labor intensive and tedious to create that model. Also with the AI, we now have, potentially we could ask an LLM, hey, the question is, can people buy stuff on my store? And then it would know how to translate that into a better prompt, knowing I had a map of my app, that it could then kind of ask a model on, like, okay, let's kind of run a test, but follow recorded steps to get there. I hope I'm making sense here. But there's this idea that right now, like a year ago, people would say, they would just ask ChatGPT, like, hey, test my site. Or as of this year with MCP servers, you would just tell it, yeah, buy something on my site. And it would just go to the front page and then keep making educated guesses to get to the next step, to get to the next step, to get next step. It doesn't really know, other than you're just kind of hoping it's like, well, it's a smart person-like entity that it'll figure out what the next thing is. It doesn't really know what the next thing is, but it's going to make an educated guess, like, oh, to buy something, I'm going to have to add a product. So let's look for finding products, right? But if I had a map, it has to do less guessing, right? And so that's kind of where I'm going. So really, there's two products that I'm working on simultaneously. When I made my first announcement a month ago and everything kind of everyone globbed onto it, where my head was at was just that I'm going to make a WebDriver BiDi from scratch library. And then a week or two into it, while all of a sudden everyone was blowing up on just talking about that, I realized that I need this kind of map creation tool. And so the last 2 weeks, in this crazy, we have to talk about this, the crazy attention that it's gotten on LinkedIn. I've had to basically nudge people in the direction of talking about this bigger idea of needing an app map for your stuff. And I think those two things, having a library built from scratch that can be a little bit more smarter than your average browser driver, but you also need an app map. Those two things, that's what I'm kind of working on. Again, I'm just realizing I'm just over answering all these things. Anyway, gotta keep me focused, man.
Jason, I can't put any of this into a 60-second YouTube. You need to improve your 30 to 60-second answers.
I totally do. Yeah, I mean, it would help when to actually have a demo for you to look at.
Yeah. When you have one, please come on back and we'd be happy to look at it and share it with the world. Let me summarize what you said just to make sure that I understand. So it sounds like what you're trying to build is basically a service that learns from what's going on in the application. Based on that, it generates a map, or maybe can be referred to as a heat map as well, or like a flows or journey of workflows through the application. And then it will automatically generate tests and execute those tests and provide test results. How do you envision that?
Right. So the idea would be that if you wanted to run it against your dev site, you could just do that explicitly. The other thing it could do is when you're in a dev loop, Lovable or Claude Code or whatever, it could automatically choose which subset of that entire heat map of your app that it needs to run. Because we all know also that running your entire end-to-end test suite can take too long. So another thing that we maybe would more specifically ask LLMs or AI stuff, this is kind of like, what build tools are really good at, of like not having to run the entire test suite, but figuring out what subset is relevant to the section that you're doing. So for example, on testtrack.org, each one of those test modules are relatively independent. And so it would mostly focus on immediately running all the tests in the current module. And then maybe behind the scenes, it would then, like second tier priority, it would then go and run as a regression test all the other module test to make sure that it doesn't break anything else that was working. And this is kind of a known problem with these vibe coding tools, is that it potentially goes and breaks something that in a totally different module that you didn't want it to. So there's kind of like two ways. So there's kind of a like a different way to phrase this. Vibe coding is great, but how you test in while you're vibe coding an app is a complete open question. Right now, really the only thing you can do is just cross your fingers and hope that it works. But you still have to open up. You immediately, even if you have Cloud Code or Lovable, in a second page, you have a web page that you click refresh and you quickly, in 10 seconds, go click around and make sure that it kind of is directionally correct, right? I'm hoping to kind of record that activity, and that becomes the seed towards creating all these tests, right? But you need that graph of all the stuff to do it. The other aspect of it, at the high level, you have this heat map, if you will. The other, at the lower level, just focusing on that, we need to get a little bit smarter. The metaphor that I've had is that if we're using the driving metaphor and the car metaphor, makes sense because it's like web driver, right? So right now, everyone gets really, really upset when a test fails, when it's like flaky, because it wasn't able to, because like an unexpected pop-up comes up or something like that. We should, instead of trying to think of the world as only green or red or black or white, it failed or it didn't, we should actually embrace that the world is in fact flaky. Once you have a web server on one computer and a user on somewhere else on a network, networks are inherently flaky. That's just reality, right? The request from your browser to the server and back might have gotten bounced off a satellite, might have gone over an undersea cable. It's a miracle it even worked at all, right? So I'm also trying to forget all the AI stuff. I'm just arguing for, we should have 3 colors in our dashboards. Green, red, and orange would be the middle one. Orange means the test passed, but it had to kind of do a workaround. Maybe it had to get a cookie pop up to go away. Maybe you had to make a sign up for a newsletter thing to go away. Maybe a product was unavailable in blue, but it was still available in red. Or maybe the button, you said click the blue button, but it had to click the red button instead because the designer changed it without you talking about that, fixing it. All kinds of things. But we should basically change the assumption from it should always pass to it's a miracle that it passed. Assume from basically the browser driver and the way we write our tests, or the tests get written, should have a defensive driving posture. And so there is effectively going to be a third category in your test dashboard where it's like the orange tests, where it was able to get to the end, but you have to go check it out. And that also being able to even get to the end and not just being stuck, that means that you also have to have this app map to be able to route around to it. This is one of those things of this is my intention of building this kind of a tool. It then also takes actual real applications, trying it out to see if this is actually going to work. So, but that's what I'm working on.
Of course.
And so actually already on kind of iteration 3 of this, because if you go to Vibium.ai, this is where the idea was 6 months ago. And so there, again, it's my fault for putting this out there and then not writing a book or tutorial, but I'm also used to 10 years of people basically ignoring what I'm working on. So it was one of those things of I'm just going to throw it out there and see what happens. And then now all of a sudden people are dissecting everything that I'm doing. So I have to be a little more careful. But yeah, for the last 2 years, I've been talking about what is probably available on Vibium.ai, which will hopefully, I'll be shutting that down soon and making that just a landing page. Express your interest, give me your email address. That is a global network idea I've been obsessed with for the last 2 years. There's that. And then from trying to talking to people about that led to the announcement a month ago of before I start a global network of test nodes around the world, let's make something that's useful just to one person on a laptop. That's why I announced a month ago. And then how to make that work, that's where I kind of really stumbled onto the map idea. And that's what I'm building most recently. So people are effectively they're responding to, and there's even now YouTube video reviews of Vibium.ai. They're reviewing the website of the global idea, right? And anyway, so there's this balance between I'm just working on stuff, and I guess I have the I thought I did have the luxury of no one noticing or no one caring. So I'm just going to keep working and iterating. And in the last couple of weeks, all of a sudden, a lot of people started noticing, a lot of people started caring. And so I had to be a little bit more cautious about what I'm putting out there. right?
Well, what they say
But
is all publicity is good publicity. So, it
right,
keeps
right.
attention.
What's yeah,
You know what I noticed? I noticed an interesting pattern where when one of the big competitors to like OpenAI puts out a product release, OpenAI very quickly has a new product release as well to ultimately kind of like silence the hype around whatever. Like if Gemini
right,
releases a new product or Anthropic,
right, right.
OpenAI, boom, now has a new product or a new feature that they've added. And all of a sudden,
Yeah,
boom, they're the top of. And so I'm like, that's a really good strategy because they're always on top of the conversation. And so it's almost kind of like the stuff that you're doing, whatever the news you're putting out, regardless, in a month, it'll be forgotten, but people just keep talking about it.
right. Well, these are different things. Luckily, I don't have, well, I mean, hold on, just on the OpenAI versus like Google thing. There's
Yeah.
I think kind of dissecting that almost borderline conspiracy theory stuff. There's a theory that these people have had that product in the bank just ready to be released at
Yeah.
any, like it was, let's say it was ready a month ago. And then
Yeah.
now it's basically the person in product marketing, they're just fingers on the button waiting for the press cycle to be at the point where once they get word something is coming out, boom, they press the button and stomp over the news. But
I
so
believe that.
basically their process is to always be a month ready, and then they time it perfectly, right?
Yes.
Just to steal the news cycle. In this particular case, I don't necessarily have that problem. It's more of like I'm not purposely now holding back a little bit because I'm worried that OpenAI is going to steal my like no. But I have a different observation though, that just from my my career of desperately wanting people to care about browser automation and then never doing it, all of a sudden we're in this weird window of time where everyone cares about browser automation now, because you have effectively for the last couple of years these AI brains in a jar, and now everyone wants to give them arms and legs to go do stuff in the world. And so the lowest hanging fruit is to give it access to driving a browser. And now we have a whole bunch of people who care about this stuff that, it's a lot easier to have to explain what I've spent my career trying to do, right? Like automating these things. Anyway, so all of these big AI companies do have computer use. They do have things that drive operating systems and browsers, but none of them are as crazy laser focused on testing and test automation specifically. I've said this other places, but like there's 3 killer apps for automating a browser. There's process automation, like approving invoices. There is data scraping, and that's kind of a dark art. People don't like talking about it, especially the people who are really good at it. And then the third one is test automation, right? And that's my lane, and that's where I like to be. And yeah, so I feel like some of these big vendors, when they're putting out some kind of browser automation thing, they're making it very generic, and I'm just focused on the test automation part.
Cool. Another question I had for you. So how do you envision people are using Vibium? Is it an IDE plugin? Is it a website like Vibium AI that you go to, put in a URL? What do you think?
Right, right. So there's like I forgot the phrase for it. It's not go to market. Okay. It's more of like what's the user experience or developer experience for this, right? There's 2 things that I'm evaluating, and which I end up actually shipping. It just comes down to what's the easiest to, like, what's the best developer experience. One option is a browser extension. That's easiest because whoever is personally motivated, they can put it in that browser, that done and done. The other option is like a JavaScript include that you put into the app that you're developing. That in a less of a greenfield area, that is hard. Just that step, potentially you get hung up on getting approval from IT and all kinds of stuff. I would argue though, I'm not going after those apps on day one. If it was a JavaScript include, and why you would need it an include is that it's when you're clicking buttons and going on stuff in a page, you have to instrument the page in such a way that those events get fired and sent back to a server somewhere. Very likely, if it's a JavaScript include, it's some kind of library, you would be prompting Lovable or Claude Code saying, hey, I'm using Vibium event recorder. Here's the library. Here's the link to it. Here's the documentation. Include this library in the app. Go do it. And then verify that it's actually included. And then you move on, right? So it's either you have to get approval from your AI friend to include like that's part of your dev workflow to tell it, here's the link and include it, or it's you just install a browser extension and you use that. That's how you would use it to start kind of effectively instrumenting your app, so you record the events. Then how you would use it is like kind of twofold. There's every time, again, in that dev loop, once after it's installed, it is after you probably do like a substantial change, it automatically is referencing, let's say, the Vibium database or whatever it is, and looking for what subset of end-to-end workflows it probably should run. And then we'll go do that and run it behind the scenes. If you're familiar, if you already are in and are using those Claude Code or Lovable workflows, you've probably already seen this where it does a bunch of stuff, restarts your node server, and immediately gets a syntax error, kind of like, it crashed. And then it can notice what the crash is and automatically get in kind of a recovery loop where it tries to fix the error and get it back to up and running. What I'm hoping is basically, and this would probably be like a prompt to like, LLM.md or Claude.md, like it's kind of instructions on what to do when it's like after it does some change. It does the change, fixes any syntax errors on just booting it up, runs your unit tests, and runs your Vibium tests. So kind of like you're giving it instructions on like exactly what to do. That I want to get, to add like clarity on what I'm doing. Like I would love to get embedded into that Lovable or Claude Code or Gemini CLI dev cycle where you have your end-to-end quote unquote Selenium tests getting run when they need to in that loop, right? Like I don't feel like anyone's really doing that or done that yet, or if they are, like haven't really kind of nailed it. Like I really want to focus on that developer experience where you can just focus on talking to the AI, your AI friend. Also, I've been calling it, I use the phrase AI friends all the time, but because the letters L and I look the same and with the sans serif font, I've just been calling it Alf. So talking to Alf, your AI friend, but the AL friend, whatever. Anyway, talking to your AI friend about building your app behind the scenes when necessary, it will then run your end-to-end tests. Right now, I've just seen where you either have to, for anything like in the browser visually, you would have to kind of manually test that. I've seen some other people talk about how maybe they use Puppeteer and an MCP server and they're giving it instructions on how to test stuff. But I feel like the stuff I'm adding with the map, it can be a little bit more intelligent about knowing exactly, like literally, if you had a graph, it's graph theory. If you had a graph and you're working on some known subset, it would then potentially could reference the graph and you can know which effectively neighborhood you absolutely have to test, of which pages are interconnected. And maybe the login pages going all the way down to that section. And you might be safe. Maybe in a background thread, you could run all the other stuff because your most recent change didn't break anything or shouldn't have broken it. Anyway, there's another aspect of this where imagine you're trying to sell this to your manager or you're trying to communicate what this whole thing is to your coworkers, or maybe let's say we do get to that advanced state where you're giving your agents a whole bunch of stuff and you're coming back an hour later. There is going to be a user interface that as the app map gets created, the interface would kind of feel like zooming around on Google Maps, where you're just casually just going around and seeing what people are doing. Like literally you can zoom out. It's a zoomable interface and you can see all the different workflows that would start by being recorded by users, but then you can flip modes and kind of then see where all of your user going. And then you can kind of have some more advanced overlay where you can kind of see our AI agents when they're testing are going over these workflows, but we actually have real production workflows that are not getting touched. You can almost, again, the interface that I'm going for, and this is why I have to apologize, but for not releasing it, but this is hard to make, just especially I'm like development team of one, but making like a Google Maps interface where you're asking to navigate to a certain destination and you're choosing between two different routes. And you're like, your pros and cons are like, oh, this one's faster, this one's less distance. That kind of like visualization of your app, that I think would be kind of interesting when you're outside of that dev workflow and you just kind of want to get an overview of your application and what things were done or not done. The other thing I'm kind of going for is trying to capture a little bit of the magic that we had in the very first version of Selenium 21 years ago. It was very visual and colorful and animated. You click play and then a whole bunch of stuff happens. So I'm really hoping to capture a little bit of that in this user interface where it's kind of like, maybe imagine some kind of split screen where you had Google navigation where it would plotting a point to point. You click play and then you also get a live cam view of the car as it's driving. You can have that by having a separate little sub window of like, okay, now I'm going to automate a browser in the cloud. I'm going to see that run simultaneously with showing it going on the map. That would be kind of fun to be able to zoom out and see all the things playing. But that almost feels like, I think that's a cool, like day one, version one way to understand what the stuff is. But I'm hoping if you use it correctly, it's kind of invisible because really your interface is Claude Coder lovable, your conversation with your chatbot, and maybe the web browser that you see, and it's doing all the testing behind the scenes.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Jason, I want to do some less than 60-second clips for social media to capture you
Right.
answering certain questions. So let's target that response time
Sure.
if possible. Let me see here. Was there a single moment that made you say, I have to build Vibium?
Is there a single moment that made me think that I had to build Fibium? Yes, actually. 6 months ago, I was trying to get people really excited about this global network of, I was building Uber or Airbnb for testing. I was going to have like, it's going to be decentralized. It's going to be built on idle capacity. You plug in your phones and it runs tests overnight. And I talked to a whole bunch of people and they were like, yeah, I don't need that. So it was one of those things of like, you can have a plan and up until you get punched in the face by reality. And everyone kind of kept coming back to me and saying, actually, flaky tests and test maintenance are the biggest problem. Like, I don't really have a running tests in Australia on idle phones problem. And and I really want, I've been thinking about that other idea for 2 years. And so I finally internalized, like, basically like end of April, beginning of May, of like, maybe I should start listening to the people who are saying test maintenance and test flakiness really is the number one problem I should be solving. And so I did that, put those into bullet points, and then started figuring out exactly how I was going to target that. And that's kind of where Vibium came.
What is the single biggest mistake that most QA teams are still making today?
The single biggest mistake the QA teams are making today. I wish it's one of the things like I'm not hanging out with all those teams, so I'm not there to actually see what they're doing. I know I've had some like conventional advice that from way back when, like my sauce days, where it was like people were just probably doing it too much. Like ice cream is great, but you probably shouldn't eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner kind of a thing. And you should always be looking at end-to-end tests as kind of like a dessert, an ice cream kind of a thing. Like that's kind of one way to. And I think some other people to go to the other end of the spectrum by saying like, well, maybe to extend the metaphor, ice cream's not good for you. You shouldn't have it at all. And so we'll just not have any end-to-end tests and it's all just manual. I think that's kind of a failure mode here. So yeah, they're either not doing end-to-end tests at all or they're doing it too much. That's probably the two things that I could see people doing wrong.
Well, that makes sense. Still,
I've been
still
timing
true.
this, by the way.
Still true. Yeah, oh, amazing. I love that. Still true 21 years later, this message. When I was working at Sauce Labs as a solutions architect, I found the same thing. Most of it was too much. Thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. One client had 150,000 plus automated UI tests executed in a week. It was a large customer with many teams, but I still found that ridiculous, and especially because their pass rate was like 40%. So it's like tens of thousands of failing tests that I'm sure nobody was reviewing. Just made me think like, why? What was the value of any of that?
Right. Well, I mean, there is again, I've joked that if I start a podcast, extending the metaphor is going to be the name of the podcast. But I like this metaphor of tests are kind of like climbing gear, where if you're climbing a mountain, if you're only 5 feet off the ground, you don't need them at all because if you fall, you're not going to die. But if you're 1,000 feet up on El Capitan, I don't know how tall El Capitan is, but whatever that is in meters. Anyway, if you're really up there, falling is bad. Bad things can happen. And so there is a tendency, if you're part of some expedition, some manager is going to say, like, they're going to give you all of the climbing gear, right? Which then at some point, too much is too much. It literally weighs you down and is counterproductive. You can't actually go any step up the mountain because you're weighed down by too much gear. So it's a very weird, like, balancing point to have
Yeah.
just enough, because your tests are basically safety insurance kind of a thing, especially when you have too much money or reputation on the line. There is a tendency to say like, we should do more, right?
Yeah. I that was one of my favorite metaphors actually that I've ever heard. It's a beautiful metaphor because it's you need enough to survive and that's it. No more. Any more is probably not gonna be valuable. It'll probably be
Right.
hurt you more than help you.
And you have a perverse incentive, especially places that let's say your QA budget got unlocked because of some really embarrassing outage the week before. No manager is going to really feel comfortable going and saying, hey, in this next release, let's do less testing. Like if you still are living in the shadow of that last embarrassing thing that
Yeah.
like, anyway, so it can get kind of weird, right?
for sure.
other
It's a
than
interesting.
that's why sometimes you
All
have to bring
right.
in an outside consultant to say, you know what, actually, you need to do less testing.
Yeah. All right. Another one for you, Jason. Will AI like Vibium make most manual QA jobs disappear in the next 5 years?
No, the job is going to change though. You're going to be a manager. You're going to shift to, like, if you're in some job and you have a boss, your job will effectively be shifting. The AIs will be doing quote unquote your job, but someone still has to review the work that's getting done. So you're going to basically be moving up the stack and looking at dashboards and looking to make sure that everything is getting done. But some human with eyes or whatever has to actually look at what that is. And that tester person probably is in the best spot to take that job because they kind of know what good looks like, right? And I guess it basically just everyone shifts up one level. What that means for your manager and what job they're doing, I don't know. But if you're in testing, you're effectively will be kind of moving towards a manager of the robots. The metaphor that I like, again, another
Mm,
metaphor, is if you were in a warehouse moving boxes from one shelf to the other, your job will now be standing on some platform, looking down at the warehouse floor, watching all the robots do quote unquote your old job, moving boxes from one side to the other. But you're going to know, hey, I did that job last week. And I know it should only take 10 seconds to go from that shelf to the others. If some robot is taking 5 minutes to do that, you know to stop it, stop the system and figure out what's going on. Maybe the robot needs an oil change or something, whatever, right? But you're going to be in more of a supervisor manager kind of a role, looking at the work that's getting done. That's my guess. And then there's going to be probably some subset of tests that are kind of just hard to automate, or you're going to have to do stuff like instrument your app in some weird way to make it so it's automatable. There'll always be edge and fringe cases that you'll have to just, it'll just be humans doing human stuff.
yeah, that makes sense. I actually have a metaphor. I came up. I'm not as good as you are, but I came up with this one in 2023, like right after ChatGPT first came out, and I used it to try and build and deploy a few web applications, and I went through the whole SDLC with them. I said that we will be like a conductor of an orchestra versus like before we are just an individual piece playing an instrument and all of us together, right, create a symphony. Now we will be conductors overseeing a bunch of robots, as you kind of said, performing different kinds of operations, ultimately trying to create an entire symphony, which is to deliver the highest quality software as fast and as cheap as possible. And we'll be overseeing that. What do you think of that metaphor?
No, you're spot on. And although I have to unfortunately regret to inform you, you're not the first one to use that metaphor. The first time I
Really?
saw this though, I just looked this up. Ken Gardner, he's the founder of SOASTA or SOASTA, depending on how you pronounce it. He started that right just like a year before I started Sauce Labs, and his first office was right across from Google. Anyway, he told me the whole thing, gave me the whole pitch, and I even got to see the software. He used if you've played around with, is it GarageBand? Yeah, the Apple app GarageBand. His interface, so SOASTA was a load testing tool. So you generate a whole bunch of load against an app, but the interface that you would use to create your load test, his metaphor or what he was basically wholesale trying to implement was like GarageBand for load testing. So like in a GarageBand, you have multi-tracks. You have like a 16 tracks. You have your string section, your percussion, whatever. He had like you could put in your browsers, your API tests, your various different ways you can add in a wall of sound, but instead of it's a wall of load, I guess, to your app. And you can literally, again, like a GarageBand thing, when you're trying to like put together a song, your load test effectively is a 5-minute thing that would look totally natural being loaded up in GarageBand, where you can click play and you can see certain things firing at certain times, or you could even drag the bar where you could have that launch at a later time. So I think you're totally right. So in this case, though, I guess it's the difference between, you're saying a conductor, right? That's kind of a live orchestra. In this particular case, this is more of like a studio producer, I guess, if you will. I'm
Mm,
equating those things to effectively be the same, that you are conducting a group of instruments to
mhm,
do a thing. Anyway, so I remember seeing that interface live.
mm.
Never got to use that as a customer or anything like that, the SOASTA interface. And I don't even know if actually that survived past year 2008 or whatever. But that's kind of the metaphor that they were going for.
Okay,
Yeah, which
cool.
means you're totally right.
Sweet. I'm only 17 years late to the metaphor.
That's okay. No,
All
but
right.
there's a thing though that's it's frustrating. You heard of the curse of Cassandra? The Cassandra curse. It's was it Greek or Roman mythology? But Cassandra was the curse was being able to predict the future. Although that's actually not the curse. Given the ability to predict the future, the curse was not was no one believing her, right? So there's this thing where it's a curse to kind of see the future, but then no one believing you, right? So the job totally, absolutely will be you will be like a conductor. You won't be
Mm,
playing the instruments. You'll be conducting the robots playing all the music. And then of course that's extremely triggering to some people because like, no, they're humans. They want to play the instruments. But
of course.
knowing that that's how the job is going to move, that you're going to be a conductor, not everyone's going to believe you. They're going to actively want you to be wrong. And the other people
Mm,
are just going to just not see it. Right. They're just like,
mhm.
no, I see a whole bunch of people playing instruments. I see a whole bunch of people writing
Yeah,
tests. I don't believe you.
right. That makes sense. Uh,
Anyway.
In less than 60 seconds, besides AI, what is the next big technology that will completely change software testing?
That's a short one. These glasses, these AR glasses, I think we've had several kind of attempts to make it happen. And I think they might actually, we're like one revision away from them being really, really common. I think the specific thing is that they're making them less nerdy. Like they're starting to look like normal glasses, but that has all kinds of implications for how you test these things. Because like they might have audio in, like audio only inputs, maybe just one button, like an interaction. It's all based on what it sees in the environment. There isn't going to be like a user interface with rendered windows and things like that. So how those things get tested, it's really more like the user interfaces over time are just blending into the background of our lives, right? So to do an end-to-end test, you might actually have to point these glasses at a refrigerator or a street or whatever. Like testing is going to get really weird because I think that
Mm,
AR, XR, VR, not VR, not Google Glass, but these glasses that are more augmented reality. I think that's
mhm,
going to be finally become a platform that we're going to actually have to take seriously as a thing that
mm.
we test stuff on.
A wonderful point. I love that. Never thought about it.
I
Another one
also
in less
I
than
also
six.
just want an excuse to buy these glasses.
Yeah. Don't we all? I was very excited about the what was it, the Apple, I forget what they were called, but then
Well,
seeing the
not Google
reviews
Glass,
and now it's like slowly dying out. I'm glad I didn't buy them.
right? Yeah, I mean, if those things become a platform, then yeah, we're gonna have to figure out how we test them.
That'll be fun. Another one in less than 60 seconds. What's your best piece of advice for a developer who wants to test better in the future?
Right now, just start playing around with all these tools. My favorites are Lovable and Claude Code. I know these things go so fast. You know, the headlines are out like, "Oh, Claude Code is yesterday's news. It's now OpenAI Codex or whatever." But literally get past the phrase vibe coding and literally go download and make an app using that style where you and see how long you can go without actually looking at the code. Like just get used to that workflow. I would even double recommend someone doing that if they hate it, if they hate vibe coding and think it's irresponsible and unprofessional and horrible or whatever. Don't just read an article about it. Like go do it. Like have a very extremely informed opinion on exactly why you hate it. And actually, I don't even trust anybody who promotes the technology until they can say three things that suck about it. So if you hate it, like you could very quickly find three things that suck about it. Like for one, how does end-to-end testing get plugged into a Lovable or Claude Code, dev cycle, right? That's what I'm working on. But there's other things. I would just like that is where a lot of interesting stuff is happening, and you should play with those tools, even if you don't do it long term, professionally, full time, whatever. But that is the thing that's getting talked about right now, and it'd be useful to just not read an article about it, but actually get like a first person opinion about it.
Yeah, wonderful point. Jason, looking forward, what do you want Vibium's legacy to be?
Oh man, we haven't even gotten to a first release yet, so it's a little premature for me to talk about
And where can I get my certificate?
legacy. Right, right. That's all funny. Yeah, we kind of talked around it, but we didn't actually talk about the phenomenon of what's been happening around Vibium, hashtag Vibium on LinkedIn. 6 months from now, a year from now, everyone like, what's that? What's LinkedIn? Whatever. Or like,
Yeah.
what the heck was going on? I don't know. I can't do this in 60 seconds, but I do have a theory that people, and that's not a theory, it's reality. People have built some pretty interesting careers around writing a lot of Selenium tests and writing a lot of Appium tests, right? There's a lot of stuff that needs to get written. I think that's kind of driving a lot of the interest. Also, especially if the kind of the moment that we're in where it's like, oh shoot, do I have to throw that all that experience away and go learn Playwright or whatever, right? And so a lot of people are excited about this where they don't have to necessarily throw away all their knowledge. And I guess like in this particular case, I hope the legacy is that, if you have a career or income based on, being able to test software, that I guess the legacy would be that there's still an economy around these things, right? I don't like, I see the job shifting, like AI is doing more of the work. It's a lot of, interestingly, a lot of also people are saying that like it's putting out a lot of bad code. Some people are putting vibe coding cleanup specialist in their job titles, right? And so it feels like there will still be jobs out there. And if anything, maybe I guess the legacy would be that like, now there, yeah, Selenium, Appium, and then there would be Vibium is not just some funny thing that the people put on their, or Vibium certified, not just the funny thing that they put in their LinkedIn profile now, but like an actual, there is an economy around it, right?
Mhm.
There are Vibium jobs and things that you can kind of do to, stay gainfully employed, I guess, if you will.
I love that. And that's actually a wonderful segue to my last question, which is for people that want to get involved in Vibium, where do we go? Who do we reach out to?
Right, right. So there's been a lot of inbound interest last month, and it's been overwhelming. And I can't like I feel bad because there's a bunch of unanswered, LinkedIn messages that I haven't been able to get back to. Like maybe medium term, there will be projects on GitHub where people can kind of asynchronously download the code, try it out, fix something, and send in a pull request or a bug report or something like that. That's probably going to be the most useful. Right now, those projects aren't on GitHub or any other source control yet, but there will be there. And then anyway, so that's one way. The other way is it's not obvious yet. Hopefully in the next couple of days, maybe by the time this video goes live, Vibium.ai is probably where people can kind of register their interest. We did send out last couple of weeks, sent out a survey and kind of were asking some people who wanted to be users, who wanted to help on dev, but not everyone's been able to. I haven't sent that survey out to anybody, but basically I'm not quite ready just today to have all this inbound help. But I definitely will need it once we get kind of a first uh, version one, whatever version number we actually call it, but some kind of first release out there where people can start using it. I'm kind of bracing for the pull requests and bug reports, like when those come in. So just kind of like basically like stay tuned, follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on Blue Sky or Nostr or wherever. And when there's actual code that people can start like using for real, that's where I'm hopefully going to be in a position to kind of really start taking all that feedback. And it'll be kind of an organic process as far as the people who contribute a lot of good stuff we'll be chatting a lot, I assume.
Got it. So you want me to share your private email so that anyone can email you? No, I'm joking.
No, but yeah, for now though, yeah. So
Yeah,
find me on LinkedIn, find me on Blue
yeah,
Sky, and then Vibium.ai. I think keep hitting refresh on that. Eventually, there'll be some link to source control, or it'll be like a developer's help join the project.
beautiful.
It'll be like a project like Appium or Selenium where people will be able to slot in and help. I was going to say, like the interesting thing, the opportunity that we have in the future where we're just going to like assume we have AI friends helping us every step of the way. So like we'll need help with documentation, but for someone who wants to help the most on the project, you'll be using an AI tool to do that. So like wherever we go, just kind of assume that we're using all the AI tools to improve the project every step of the way in all the different dimensions.
AI building AI. That is one of the futures.
Right. With the people standing back managing the whole process, right?
Yes, exactly. Cool. Well, Jason, thank you so much for hopping on the Tech Heartbeat podcast. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for filling us in on Vibium. I personally finally have a good idea of what it is and what you're thinking about. And maybe in 2 weeks, it'll totally change after you get more feedback and do some iterations, but at least happy to be caught up to date. And thank you for your time and have a beautiful day.
Yeah, thank you.
My
You
pleasure,
too.
Jason. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye bye.